Hello everyone and welcome back. As usual, I'm DJ Zelix from Teen Lone Wolf, here with another immersive railroading tutorial video. Now, last episode we covered tracks and how to make them, and some ways you can do some clever stuff with it. Today we are covering just regular cars and handcarts. Now, really quickly, I went and built a really nice kind of narrow gauge track around here, just to kind of show off for this episode. Now, for this episode, we need to introduce yet another tool. And this tool is the coupling hook. And you make it using 4 steel. You make a coupling hook. Now, for those of you that are not from Europe, this is how they couple. This is how they couple and uncouple trains in Europe, or using the Arbuckle type coupling. Or, what are those? Buffer type coupling, as I call it, as opposed to the US's knuckle couples, or knuckle couplers. So, that's what we do, what we use in order to couple and uncouple. Well, we don't really, we use to couple and uncouple train cars. So, what are we making today? So, let me open up this casting basin, if you remember. Press on type. And as you can see, we've got just a whole plethora of stuff we can make. Now, I'm going to make I'm going to make, good lord, I'm going to make a freight car and a passenger car, just for a bit of changing things up, if you will. So, as you can see, if you hover over items, you can see how heavy they are and what type of gauge that they are meant for, and I'll kind of explain that in just a second. For this episode, I think I'm going to make a way car and a rail and tie car. So, to make a rail, as you notice, when I clicked on it, it brought up this second window. This is the various components you can make of that car using the casting basin. So, in this case, it's the frame, the bogies, and the bogie wheels. Now, normally, you'll need one frame. So let me go ahead and cast that. That's for Minecraft gauge. Oops, my bad. Let me throw that back in. As you notice, it's not really colored very nicely, but you can just throw it on and it reclaims it perfectly. Alright, there we go. Okay, single cast that. There we go. Now, when I place this down, you have to kind of line yourself up so it knows which orientation you do place it down. It looks kind of wonky, mostly because it's just kind of hovering there, and it's literally just the frame. If you take your large wrench from the first episode and you right-click on it, you'll get a not flavor test, but like a pop-up that states what exactly you need and where you get it. So in this case, I need 2 bogies for this car, and it states casting. That means that they're made using the casting basin. And then for bogie wheels, which are also from the casting basin, as we previously saw. So let's really quickly grab those. So go back, hit bogie, single cast that. And you typically want to right-click this with empty hand. It works without an empty hand, but it's easier to pick stuff up. So, and then grab 4 of those wheels. Now, as you notice, when I press single cast, and it finished casting, and I press it again, it turns red, but it doesn't cast. It's because a casting base can only hold one object after it's casted it. So, if I right-click this again, it's casted and finished casting that other one. So, there's 2 ways you can put down objects if you have them on a car that you're building. You can either right-click with them in your hand, close by it. I apologize for the phone. Or you can right-click using the wrench. And that works for the wheels too. And you notice that this pops up all nice and done. And if we right-click it using the wrench, you'll see that there's a statement that says rail and tie car is complete. You always want to make sure that you right click with a wrench just to make sure that it is complete, because it's not always immediately obvious to tell. So let's make the rail or the way car next. So way car frame, single cast this, and you'll notice that if I go in here, there's no bogies. This is a bogieless car type, and I know that from memory that this needs 2 frame wheels. Now, if I remembered correctly, as I put the wheels down, you'll notice that it's not complete yet. It looks still very barren. If I right-click it with the large wrench, you'll see another message has popped up, and it says missing 1 shell, 3 large plate. Now, what in the world is a large plate? Well, now we get to use a new machine, which is the plate roller over here. And you'll need some blocks of steel. So if I come over here and I right-click it, you'll see this also has a GUI. So you've got gauge, as you probably have kind of guessed by now. And you want to, in this case, we're selecting narrow. And you'll see plate type. And there's technically 3 plate types, even though there's 4 options. So small, medium, large, which is what we're getting. And then the 4th one, which is a boiler plate. And from here, you can choose a boiler for a steam locomotive. And we'll go over that when we're covering steam locomotives. For now, we just need a large plate. Now, you need to right-click with a block of steel. I'm going to kind of move away. And if I right-click it, it'll pop out with a large plate. Now, obviously, it changes how many large plates you get out of it, depending on your gauge. For example, for Minecraft gauge, you actually get 2 per each block of steel. Now, something of quick note, while I'm grabbing these, if I have a large plate in hand, and I try and right-click it, it does not give me an object. You need to right-click with a open hand. So now, let's right-click this, and now it's done, and it's consumed all 3 of those plates. And again, you get a message that says way card is complete. Come in here. Now I'll kind of explain something. Well, actually, let me grab the handcart first, and then I'll kind of explain that. And you'll notice that these coupling types are not the same. This is a drawbar. I think it's referred to as a drawbar type, and this is a knuckle coupler. Do not worry, they still will couple together. Now, I'm going to be doing something that some people in the immersive railroading community don't exactly enjoy, and I'll explain why in a second, which is called gauge clashing. I'm going to grab a handcart, and as you notice, when I pull it up, it's got various information. With the locomotives, it's a bit different. So it gives you the weight, the works, which is whoever built it, the horsepower. In this case, since it's a handcart, it's only got 1 horsepower. How much traction it has, the max speed, which is in kilometers per hour. If you don't change it over into miles per hour, you can change that in in-game configurations. There we go. You can change that in the in-game configurations. And by the way, I'm getting out of that secondary menu using the escape button. And at the very bottom, it says gauge. Now, you can, at the moment, and we are going to be changing this so you can gauge lock objects, but at the moment, you can have any sort of car on any gauge. In this case, this is modeled for standard gauge, which means that when it's on a standard gauge track, that's how it's meant to look. You'll notice that when I cast this, however, let me go ahead and, whoops. There we go. You'll notice that when I place this down, it's really, really tiny. And that's simply because this is not the gauge that it's intended for. Even though it is technically set for narrow gauge, or as we casted it, it is not modeled to narrow gauge. So thus, you get this really small car. And that's true with a lot of things when you gauge class them, which simply means that you're casting them for a different gauge than they were modeled for. And it can lead to some rather interesting results, as you can see. And as I get on it, you can see this is way smaller than it should be. So that's what gauge clashing means. Now, the handcart's kind of weird. It's a locomotive, but it acts different than all the other locomotives. So if you look over to my bottom left, you'll see that there's a little box that has popped up whenever I get on top of this. And it's got the miles per hour set, which is the speedometer, a brake slider, and a throttle slider. Now, I will be telling you the controls that I have mapped for myself. However, yours is going to be different on when you initially download the mod. You can change this in your configurations under controls in the immersive engineering section. As I go here and I scroll down, you'll see there's an immersive railroading section. You can see you've got dead man switch. I'll explain that in a second. Decrease air brake, decrease throttle, increase air brake, increase throttle. Sound horn, I'll cover that in a little while. Start stop engine, again, I'll cover that in a while. Zero air brake and zero throttle. And those are what I have chosen as the best for me. Obviously, you're going to want to choose whichever works best for you. So, for me, hitting the numpad 7 is increasing the brake, which is the air brake in the controls configuration. And it's increasing and decreasing, and then 4, which I have as neutral, sets it completely to 0. For throttle, it's slightly different. 8 is increased throttle. In this case, it's going forwards. As you can see, I increase it and I'm going forwards. And 2 is going backwards. Now, you'll notice that I've turned on the brakes. However, I'm not really slowing down. That's because when I say that the handcart is very strange, it is very strange. The brakes do not actually... So, for the handcart, the brakes don't really work. They technically do, but the effect is so unbelievably negligible that there's not really a point in doing it. The way you brake a handcart, or you stop a handcart, is by putting on throttle in the opposite direction. So if I'm heading forwards, if I can move forwards, that is. I think I've got too much weight on me. Well, it's a good thing I've got this coupling hook. So if I right-click, or I shift-right-click on this, you'll see that something popped up, and it's coupler front set to shunting mode. That means that this side of the rail car is now set to shunting mode. I want to do the same for the handcart, and again, coupler back set to shunting mode. And now I can increase throttle, and well, I should be able to pull away. I did do that, right? Yeah. Interesting. Well, this brings up another thing that I should probably be talking about, which is that if you ever need to, and it's highly unrealistic, but if you ever need to pick up a rail car for one reason or another, like it's bugged out or something like that, you can shift left click on it and it will pick it up as an item. Note that when you're building a piece of rolling stock, if you shift right click it, it will disassemble it into the individual components. It will only give you back an item, like a singular item, if it is fully constructed. So just keep that in mind when you're building and you need to move the build somewhere. So now, as you can see, we can move again. So again, I'm going the opposite direction on the throttle in order to brake. Now, I'm running this at full throttle for kind of a strange reason. But oh, I know why. Let me switch this over to easy so that this actually works correctly. So, as you notice, when I last got off, I had full health. If I get off now, you'll see I'm at half, or full hunger. I'm now at half hunger. And if I do that for a bit longer, you can see it, kind of the extent of this kind of mock-up that I've made. I'm now taking damage. If I get off of this, you'll notice that I have completely and totally depleted hunger. That's what's really interesting about the handcart. And I've actually totally forgotten to grab all the food that I had set up specifically just for this. The handcart, instead of depleting, say, steam or fuel or anything that, it depletes hunger. Which is kind of interesting in that sense. Because it's the only one that's directly affected by the actual players on the cart. If you have two players, it will decrease the hunger for them equally by the same amount. You can have a max of 2 players in the handcart. But what's kind of going off of that, what's interesting about it is that even though it says it's only got 1 horsepower, it actually has a bit more than that. That's the baseline horsepower. The horsepower actually increases by how many people you have on it. So say that you've got 2 people on the handcart. You're going to have more horsepower, as you kind of would imagine for something like this. So, let me kind of send myself back. And I'm going to go ahead and put the throttle to 0, because that way I'm not depleting any of my hunger. Now, you'll notice that I kind of knew which way to put the throttle on the handcart. You're not always going to be able to remember which way you need to send the handcart. That's just kind of a thing you need to remember, is the orientation of the handcart. All the other cars, or all the other locomotives, will very clearly show which way they're facing. The handcart is the one exception. Now, you'll notice earlier that we set this to shunting mode. Which means that if... Oh. I think I just figured out something. You'll notice that this is still running, by the way. Which is a great example of the inertia that we have in the mod. Theoretically, if I had gotten off the handcart, and this wasn't coupled up to other things, it would have just straight up stopped, because it didn't have any power to keep it going. But as you can see, there we go. Okay, so as you can see, I'm right clicking on these and it says what it is, if it's decoupled or not. Get the feed going on here. Which means that I should be able to move, but it seems that I'm stuck for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why. As I mentioned earlier, the handcart is kind of... doesn't really work very well if you've got only kind of yourself, just because the horsepower is by default 1, and it changes with how many people is on there. As these are kind of heavy cars, it can understandably not really pull them. So that's the reason why it's kind of stuck here. If I want to couple these up again, though, I simply shift right click it again, and it will set it back to normal mode. Yeah, I figured that would work. But if I right click it, you'll see what it's coupled to and where that object that's coupled to is. So you can see it's coupled to the handcart at that location, which if you look at my mini map, that's where it actually is in the world. And again, same way in there. So, now that I've kind of explained part of this, what can I do with these? Well, the way cart is kind of an exception. Hold on. Because even though I use it as a passenger car in this particular instance, it technically counts as a freight car. However, As I do this, let me actually also get rid of those creepers so they don't bug me. There we go. Okay, so under normal circumstances, if you right-click just kind of in midair on a passenger car, it will not do anything. It will just kind of be itself. However, if you're in a freight car, it'll bring up this inventory. In this case, it's got 4 slots of inventory. And for the rail car, it is this many slots of inventory. I can't really count right now. However, as a quick note, the tank cars, which I have not shown, have a slightly different inventory, and it shows a graphical interpretation of how full the that tank car is, along with a slot to put in and take out whatever liquid is inside of it. And it can handle any sort of liquid as long as Ford recognizes it as a liquid. So feel free to kind of put whatever you want in there. It'll also give like a so and such out of the full max capacity. Now you'll notice that I kind of somehow got into the rail and tie car from the way car, as you can see. If you walk up to the edge of a car, that is coupled, it will actually recognize that and move you into the car it's coupled. So as you can see, I'm not really going anywhere on this side, but if I go through here, I'm now on the rail and tie car. I am now on the handcart, as you can see. So that's kind of useful if you need to get around a train that's still moving. Excuse me, cow. Cow, please. Cows. This actually helps me bring up an interesting point, though, which is that there is a very specific type of car, and I have to find it, because I can never remember what it actually looks like in this version. Now, mind you, normally these are shown as a 3D object. I currently have mine set to show as a two-dimensional object, so just keep that in mind. They do show as a 3D object. You can change that in the configurations, however, you just need to remember to do so and restart. If you don't restart, it will not update. I'm not sure where it is, but there is a car that you can place down and you can actually put animals in. And the way you do so is you use a lead, and you obviously grab an animal, you hop into the car, and you take the lead off of them, and they will stay in the car, and that the animal transport. I'm not sure what in the world, because I thought that it was part of the base mod, but I can't seem to find it. But just keep that in mind. And that kind of really finishes up today's episode. There's not a whole lot to the freight and passenger cars, honestly. It's more just kind of getting the idea of building them down, and also partially the way that the handcart works. I would not really recommend using the handcart unless you really just need to get someplace quickly with using very little resources. Make sure you have food on you, though. You can also, as a quick note, not eat while you're on a car. So if I try and eat this bread, yeah, nothing works. If I try and use the manual, nothing works. So just keep that in mind. You can't use any items while you're in a car. Obviously, you can use left shift to dismount, as you can see down below. And you just use your standard LaSalle keys to move around inside the car itself. And that's really it. So I hope this was kind of useful. It's not really a super long episode, but I have some stuff that I need to do getting ready for our break. So this is kind of a short episode. Next episode will be diesels, and actually no, it'll just be diesels and how to use them, the controls for that, how the heat system works, and all of that. So as always, I hope you enjoyed. If you like this, make sure to leave a thumbs up. If you want to see more content or get notified for more tutorials, or you want to see more gaming footage like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and that little bell icon so you get an email sent to you when they next come out. And as always, I hope I will see you in the next one. Bye.